What was your connection to the armed forces?
Well, I rather started back in high school as far as giving sequence to your interview. I graduated from West Catholic High in Philadelphia, and I was fortunate enough to bump into a Christian brother that turned me on as far as being a sincere student. And I graduated with honors and was awarded a scholarship to St. Joe's College at that time. This occurred during the Second World War, which was in 1941. Subsequent to that, I enlisted into the U.S. Navy and went through training as a naval aviator. And with that, I was commissioned in 1945. We had extensive training. And then finally down to Pensacola, where I was designated as a naval aviator. And from that point on, proceeded to do our carrier quals. And we were about to deploy to the Pacific, and they dropped the atomic bomb. So we were all put in deactive mode, you might say. And subsequent to that, I went back into civilian life and attended Villanova College. Graduated with a EE, electrical engineering degree. And during that time, I remained in the reserves, and I was flying once a month for the Naval. And my particular career was a naval fighter pilot. Subsequent to that, I was fortunate enough to become involved in the aerospace industry. And following that, I was fortunate enough to be in postal research. And we developed a lot of equipment and procedures that you're using today. In my service as a naval aviator, we worked on projects for smoke projects and different procedures relating to fleet activity. In civilian life, during the days of aerospace, I worked on the ICBM, the Interconnecting Ballistic Missile. Subsequent to that was the Atlas and the Titan program. Subsequent to that, we went into what they call the RV, the re-entry vehicle, where we would be using our Atlas boosters in order to get into orbit, and McDonnell would have the RV and in turn steer it to the appropriate target. Following that, I went into the lunar module program with Grumman, which was the shot to the moon, and we had a particular vehicle that brought the boys back when the command capsule sort of defaulted, let's say, with North American. Following that, I went into postal research, which included processing high-speed mail at maybe 35, 36K a minute. And we changed, barcode came on the beam extensively. And subsequent to that, I retired.
So you also mentioned you were in the military.
In the military, I had a couple exciting experiences. When I was up in Grove Seal, which is outside of Detroit, I did stick to a landing of a fighter aircraft and it broke in half because it was a case of going into a hospital or going into the woods, and I chose the woods. And I had some experiences, like in another incident, I was ferrying an aircraft and I did a moonlight landing. We only could see the strip on one side, there was no lights on the field. And the custodian of the field used his headlights on the car in order to show me the runway. It was rather dark.
Wow.
So I had a couple exciting experiences with flying aircraft.
Nice. That seems very scary.
After college, I was recruited by a company called ARMA, which initially was primarily naval artillery fire, a lot of servo systems. But then when the ICBM came along, they provided the inertial guidance for the ICBM, which was just a large mass of diodes, which is digital circuitry. And that was an accelerometer designed in that General Electric had a radio antennas where we had an inertial guidance, which was a case of accelerometer sensing the different three-axle movement of a particular missile.
What was a day like?
It varied in that when you were going through training, since we were involved in the voluntary, we weren't subject to the draft, we were voluntary, so the fear was you may wash out if you didn't cut the mustard, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So you always had over your head a threat of being washed out of the program, which a lot of kids were. If they didn't perform up to the standards required, they were shipped up to the Great Lakes. Now, after being designated and commissioned, then it was more or less, you did your job, whatever the particular task assigned was at the time. But outside of that, it was just normal, everyday routine living. You did have variance as far as project assignments.
You said you flew fighter planes, correct?
I was fortunate. I started out because of the situation where the PBYs and the submarines were picking up the downed pilots during the Second World War in the Pacific. We didn't have the attrition rate that the Navy assumed we would have during the conflict. So we had a large group of people training in the event of death as far as the people in the active forces. Well, you didn't have that loss, so they kept backing us up. And so they kept tacking in additional training programs. So as a result of that, I started on Piper Cubs, which is a little low airplane that flies at 40 miles an hour. And from there, you went through other aircraft. And during my tenure with the reserves over the 23-year period, I went through quite a few aircraft. In other words, between ferrying, so you had the trainers, you had the dive bombers, you had the SB-2Cs, you had the TBMs, or your torpedo, and then you had a Phantom jet, which is a twin-engine jet, and then we finally ended up with the F-9, which is a swept-wing Cougar, and then after that, we had the SB-2C, which is an anti-submarine tracker aircraft, which was had radar on it and sensing for snorkel smoke and that type of stuff. So all in all, I had quite an exposure to different aircraft.
That must have been fun. What was your favorite one to fly or learn how to fly?
Well, basically, if you're fortunate enough to be a fighter pilot, you're in a situation where it's you and the airplane, and you can do anything you want. They're highly maneuverable. You can do any crazy thing you want to do, and they're structurally designed that they'll be able to take the G-forces. Where if you get into multi-engine, which I was in for a while, which is the anti-submarine trackers, then you get into, effectively in my interpretation, this is like driving a damn bus. You just go straight and level and bore holes in the sky. You don't have that latitude of kicking all over the place if you just feel like it.
So was there a certain way to fly these, or was it just, you just
No,
kind of get
basically, they
together?
all fly the same. You do have different aerodynamics principles, like in a jet. In order to turn, or let's say bank or roll, you stall the wing. If a little flap goes up, it just stalls it. Where in a more conventional aircraft, you have flaps that go up and down, which changes the curvature surface, so to speak. I've been lucky that way that, I've had the benefit of the next generation. In '93, there's a lot of generations involved.
Yeah, there definitely is.